in the heart of Texas, where the scorching sun bleeds into endless horizons and the nights swallow whole towns in darkness. There exist stories that locals whisper only when necessary, stories that have seeped into the very soil, stories that refuse to die. Tonight, you're going to hear 5 of them. 5 accounts that will make you question whether the line between our world and something far more sinister is as solid as you've always believed. But before we begin, ask yourself this. What would you do if you discovered that the most terrifying legends in your state weren't legends at all? The first story begins on a humid July night in 1969, when the Fort Worth Star-Telegram published a headline that would haunt North Texas for decades. Fishy Maine goat terrifies couples parked at Lake Worth. The Lake Worth monster, the Goatman, whatever you choose to call it. This creature transformed a peaceful recreational area into a landscape of primal terror. Witnesses described something that shouldn't exist, a being that violated every natural law. Part man, part goat, covered in white fur and scales, with elongated clawed fingers that scraped against car windows in the dead of night. The creature stood roughly 7 feet tall, and according to terrified couples who'd parked near the lake hoping for a quiet evening, it moved with an unsettling intelligence. Picture yourself in one of those cars. You're with someone you care about, the radio playing softly, the lake reflecting moonlight like shattered glass. Then you hear it, a sound that starts as a low growl, but escalates into something between a scream and a roar. Your heart rate spikes. Your body floods with adrenaline. This is your amygdala taking control, triggering that ancient fight-or-flight response that kept our ancestors alive. But here's what makes this truly terrifying. You can't see what's making the sound. Not yet. The unknown is always more frightening than the known because your mind fills the void with your worst imaginings. Then it appears. The creature leaps from the darkness onto the hood of your car. You see its face, if you can call it that. Eyes that reflect light like an animal's, but with something disturbingly human in their gaze. It's studying you. The metal of your car buckles under its weight. You're trapped. Every instinct screams at you to run, but there's nowhere to go. This is what dozens of people reported experiencing in the summer of 1969. One couple described how the creature grabbed a spare tire from their truck and hurled it 30 feet. Think about that for a moment. The strength required to throw a tire that distance would mean this thing could tear through a car door like tissue paper. The Fort Worth police received so many calls that they were forced to take the reports seriously. Officers patrolled the area, expecting to find nothing more than teenagers playing pranks. Instead, they found something else. Scratch marks on vehicles, deep gouges in the earth, and most disturbing of all, they found tracks. Enormous 3-toed prints pressed into the mud near the shoreline, tracks that didn't match any known animal in Texas. The police measured them, photographed them, and then filed them away, because what else could they do? Now, you might be thinking this was mass hysteria, a case of people feeding off each other's fear. But consider this. The reports came from people who didn't know each other, people from different parts of the city, all describing the same impossible creature. A local man named Alan Plaster even captured a photograph, a blurry image of something white and massive crouched in the brush near the lake. Skeptics claimed it was a dog or a coyote, but Plaster insisted it was much larger, something he'd never seen before or since. What makes the Lake Worth monster particularly chilling is how it combined two of our deepest fears: the fear of the unknown and the fear of predation. This wasn't a ghost you could rationalize away. This was something physical, something that could touch you, hurt you. The creature represented a breakdown of the natural order. In our modern world, we like to believe we're at the top of the food chain, safe in our vehicles and our homes. The Lake Worth monster shattered that illusion. It reminded people that there might still be things out there stronger than us, faster than us, things that see us as prey. The sightings continued for weeks. Armed search parties ventured into the woods surrounding Lake Worth, hoping to find the creature, to prove or disprove its existence once and for all. They found nothing, or more accurately, the creature didn't want to be found. Night after night, people reported seeing it, hearing it, feeling its presence. And then, As mysteriously as the encounters began, they stopped. The creature vanished. Some theorize it had been killed or driven away. Others believed it simply retreated deeper into the wilderness, waiting, watching, biding its time. Here's the question that should keep you awake tonight. What if it's still there? Lake Worth is still a popular destination. People still park near those dark woods. And occasionally, very occasionally, someone reports seeing something moving between the trees, something that walks upright but shouldn't exist. The local authorities don't investigate these reports anymore. They've learned it's better not to look too closely at some things. But ask yourself this: if you were parked near Lake Worth and you heard the distinctive growl outside your window, would you have the courage to look? Our second story takes us south to San Antonio, to a place where the boundary between healing and horror became impossibly blurred. Bexar County Hospital stood as a beacon of hope for the community, a place where the sick came to recover, where mothers gave birth to new life, where families said their final goodbyes. But in the late 1970s and early 1980s, something went terribly wrong within those sterile white walls, something that transformed a sanctuary into a hunting ground. Patients began dying, not from their illnesses, not from surgical complications, but from something else, something deliberate. At first, the deaths seemed random, scattered across different wards and different shifts. An infant would stop breathing. A child would go into sudden cardiac arrest. The medical staff would rush to save them, but too often, they were too late. The hospital administration noticed the pattern before anyone else. The deaths clustered around certain times, certain locations, and most disturbingly, they clustered around one particular nurse. Her name was Janine Jones, and she became known as the Angel of Death. But unlike the supernatural entities we often associate with that title, Jones was devastatingly human. A licensed vocational nurse who worked in pediatric intensive care, Jones had access to the most vulnerable patients in the hospital. Infants, toddlers, children who trusted the smiling face that leaned over their beds. She used the trust to kill them. Medical investigators later determined that Jones injected her victims with drugs like digoxin, heparin, and succinylcholine, medications that induce fatal medical crises. The children would suddenly deteriorate, their small bodies convulsing, their hearts failing. Jones would then heroically attempt to resuscitate them, often successfully, creating a pattern of near-death and miraculous recovery that made her seem like a dedicated nurse rather than the predator she truly was. But some children didn't recover. Conservative estimates put her victim count at 11 deaths, though investigators believe the actual number could be as high as 60. 60 children. Think about that number. 60 families destroyed, 60 futures erased. And here is what makes this story particularly haunting. Hospital officials allegedly destroyed records of Jones as activities to avoid litigation. Evidence was misplaced, files went missing, and for years, Jones continued her killing spree because the institution that was supposed to protect those children chose to protect itself instead. This introduces us to a different kind of horror. Not the horror of monsters in the dark, but the horror of evil wearing a familiar face. Psychological research shows that we fear betrayal and violation of trust even more than we fear obvious threats. When we enter a hospital, when we place our loved ones in the care of medical professionals, we're engaging in an act of profound trust. We're making ourselves vulnerable, believing that these strangers and scrubs have our best interests at heart. Jones exploited the trust in the most monstrous way imaginable. Nurses who worked alongside Jones reported something was off about her. They noticed she seemed to crave the drama of emergency situations. She was always present when a child crashed, always the first to respond, always seeming just a little too comfortable with the chaos. But who wants to believe that their colleague, someone they work beside every day, is murdering children? The human mind resists such conclusions. We rationalize, we make excuses, we tell ourselves there must be another explanation. And while we're busy rationalizing, the killings continue. Jones was finally arrested in 1984 and convicted of murder and injury to a child. But the true scope of her crimes may never be known because of those destroyed records. She's currently serving a life sentence, but that provides little comfort to the families of her victims. And here's what should disturb you. Jones wasn't an anomaly. Serial killers in medical settings occur more frequently than the public realizes. They hide in plain sight, protected by our collective unwillingness to believe that healers can be killers. But Bexar County Hospital's nightmare didn't end with Jones's arrest. Former staff members and visitors have reported something else, something that defies rational explanation. They describe seeing a nurse in an old-fashioned uniform walking the halls, a woman who doesn't appear in any photographs, who vanishes when approached. Patients report waking to find this nurse standing beside their beds, watching them with an expression of profound sadness. Is this a ghost, a manifestation of the hospital's traumatic past? Or is it something else? A collective psychological response to the horror that unfolded in those corridors. The hospital has since closed, but the building remains. Security guards who patrol the abandoned structure report hearing children crying, hearing footsteps in empty wards, seeing shadows that move with purpose through rooms that should be vacant. They report an overwhelming sense of being watched, of invisible eyes tracking their movements through the darkness. Are these manifestations simply the power of suggestion, the mind playing tricks in a place saturated with tragic history? Or is something actually there, some echo of the children whose lives were stolen within those walls? Consider this. What if the greatest horrors aren't supernatural at all? What if the real monsters walk among us, wearing scrubs and carrying clipboards, hiding behind professional credentials and practiced smiles? That's a fear that cuts deeper than any ghost story, because it's a fear grounded in possibility. It has a fear that asks, how well do you really know the people you trust with your life? Our third story brings us to the desolate stretches of West Texas, where the desert meets the sky in an endless expanse of earth and stone. Here, near the small town of Marfa, population just under 2,000 souls, occurs a phenomenon that has baffled scientists, skeptics, and believers for over a century. The Marfa lights, glowing orbs that dance above the desert floor, splitting apart and merging together, swooping low and then soaring high, performing an aerial ballet that defies every natural explanation we've attempted to apply. The first documented sighting came in 1883, when a young cowhand named Robert Reed Ellison watched mysterious lights flickering in the distance. He assumed they were Apache campfires, but when he investigated, he found nothing. No fires, no people, just the endless desert and those impossible lights continuing their dance on the horizon. Since then, thousands of people have witnessed the phenomenon. These aren't unreliable accounts from intoxicated locals or attention-seeking teenagers. These are reports from ranchers, scientists, tourists, military personnel, people from all walks of life, all describing the same inexplicable display. Modern skeptics love to dismiss the Marfa lights as reflections of car headlights from the nearby highway, a simple case of atmospheric refraction playing tricks on observers. But this explanation crumbles under scrutiny. The lights were seen decades before automobiles existed in West Texas. They were witnessed by legendary rancher Holly Stillwell in 1916, when she was just a teenager. She described watching them move and behave in ways that bore no resemblance to any campfire or vehicle. They didn't act like anything natural. They acted like something alive, something with intention and purpose. Stand on the viewing platform outside Marfa on a clear night, and you might see them yourself. They usually appear as small points of light in the distance, typically white or yellow, though some witnesses report seeing red or blue. At first, they look stationary, easy to mistake for distant ranch lights or stars low on the horizon. But then they move, not the slow drift of a satellite or airplane, but rapid, erratic movements. They split into multiple lights, then merge back into one. They brighten until they're almost blinding, then dim to barely visible. They rise high into the air, then drop low over the ground. They seem to play, to dance, to perform for the watchers. What makes the Marfa lights particularly unnerving is their unpredictability. You can't summon them. They appear when they want to appear, following no pattern that humans have been able to discern. Some nights, dozens of people gather at the viewing area and see nothing. Other nights, lone travelers witness displays that last for hours. The lights don't care about your expectations or your instruments. They exist on their own terms, indifferent to our attempts to categorize or explain them. Scientists have tried. Multiple research teams have ventured into the desert with sophisticated equipment, attempting to capture, measure, and ultimately understand the lights. They've proposed theories ranging from atmospheric phenomena to piezoelectric effects in the quartz-rich rocks to bioluminescent insects. But none of these explanations fully account for the behavior witnesses describe. None explain how the lights can appear so bright, move so rapidly, or demonstrate what appears to be intelligence in their movements. The University of Texas at Dallas conducted a study, and while they concluded that some sightings were likely misidentified car lights, they acknowledged that a significant percentage of reports couldn't be explained by known phenomena. Local legend offers a different explanation, one rooted in tragedy and the violent history of the region. The story centers on Alsate, the last great leader of the Chisos Mescalero Apaches, who was killed by Mexican troops in 1882. According to the tale, Alsate's spirit refuses to rest, wandering the desert he once called home, searching eternally for something lost. The lights are his campfires, his signal fires, his eternal vigil. It's a beautiful story, romantic in its melancholy, but it doesn't quite fit. The lights behave strangely to be simple ghost fires. They demonstrate complexity that suggests something more than a wandering spirit. What if the truth is more disturbing than either scientific explanations or ghost stories can capture? What if the Marfa lights represent something genuinely unknown, something our current understanding of physics and reality simply can't accommodate? Imagine standing in the desert darkness, watching these lights perform their impossible dance, and realizing that you're witnessing something that shouldn't exist according to everything you've been taught about how the world works. That's existential horror. That is the terror of confronting evidence that reality is far stranger and far less secure than we've been led to believe. People who've spent extended time studying the lights report psychological effects. They describe feeling watched, feeling as though the lights are aware of them, responding to their presence. They report dreams afterward, vivid and disturbing dreams of vast intelligences moving through dimensions we can't perceive, using the lights as a way to peek into our world. These could be dismissed as imagination running wild, except the people who've never met each other, who witnessed the lights years or even decades apart, report remarkably similar experiences. Here is what you should find most unsettling. The Marfa lights have been appearing for over 140 years, and we're no closer to understanding them now than Robert Reed Ellison was in 1883. In an age where we can photograph black holes and map the human genome, where technology seems to have revealed all the world's mysteries, the Marfa lights remain stubbornly, impossibly inexplicable. They're a reminder that no matter how advanced we become, no matter how much we think we understand about the universe, there are still phenomena that resist explanation, that exist outside our carefully constructed frameworks of knowledge. And if these lights can exist unexplained, what else might be out there in the darkness, just beyond the reach of our understanding? Our fourth tale draws us to the waterways of Texas, to the rivers and creeks and lakes where the sound of weeping echoes through the night. This is the story of La Llorona, the Weeping Woman, a legend that has haunted Hispanic communities from Texas to Venezuela for centuries. But this isn't just a story meant to frighten children into good behavior. This is something deeper, something that taps into our most fundamental fears about guilt, loss, and the irreversible consequences of our actions. The most common version of the tale speaks of a beautiful woman named Maria, who lived in a small village. She married a wealthy man and bore him two sons. For a time, they were happy, but gradually, her husband grew distant, paying less attention to her and more to their children. Some versions of the story claim he began an affair. Others say he simply fell out of love with Maria, the way people sometimes do, leaving her feeling abandoned and betrayed. The details vary, but what happens next remains consistent across every telling. In a moment of rage, grief, and madness, Maria drowned her two sons in the river. Different accounts place this act in different locations across the Spanish-speaking world. But in Texas, locals will point to specific spots along the Rio Grande or the Colorado River, places where the tragedy supposedly occurred. The moment the deed was done, the moment her son's body slipped beneath the dark water, Maria realized the magnitude of what she'd done. But it was too late. What's done cannot be undone. What's lost cannot be recovered. She spent the rest of her life wandering the riverbanks, searching for her children, calling out for them, weeping endlessly. She died without finding them, and her spirit was condemned to continue the search for eternity. Now she walks near any body of water in Texas, dressed in a white burial gown, her face hidden by long black hair that drips with river water. She wails Miss Hijos, "My children, where are my children?" in a voice that carries for miles on still nights. Those who hear her crying say it sounds like the wind, like an animal in pain, like nothing that should emerge from a human throat. And if you see her, if you make the mistake of meeting her eyes, she'll mistake you for one of her lost children. She'll reach for you with waterlogged hands, try to embrace you, try to drag you into the river to join her sons in their watery grave. Parents use this story to keep children away from dangerous water, and it's remarkably effective. But La Llorona represents something more profound than a simple cautionary tale. She embodies our fear of irreversible mistakes, the terror of realizing too late that we've destroyed something precious that can never be restored. Every parent who's ever lost their temper with their child, every person who's made a decision in anger that they immediately regretted, can understand Maria's horror at what she's done. We can all imagine that moment of clarity when the rage clears, and you see the wreckage you've created. This is psychological horror at its most effective. La Llorona's tragedy resonates because it's built on emotions we understand: jealousy, rage, grief, regret. She's not an alien, monster, or an incomprehensible entity. She's someone who made a catastrophic mistake and now suffers eternal consequences. That's terrifying because it's plausible. We can map that story onto our own lives. Imagine the moments where we came dangerously close to making our own irreversible errors. Sightings of La Llorona continue to this day. People report seeing a woman in white near rivers and lakes throughout Texas, especially along the border regions. They describe her appearing suddenly in their headlights, standing by the roadside, her clothes dripping despite there being no rain. Drivers who stop to help her say she vanishes before they can reach her, or worse, that she approaches their vehicle and they see her face, a face twisted by grief and madness eyes that reflect no light, a mouth open, and an eternal scream. Some claim to have photographed her, blurry images of a pale figure standing near water. Those skeptics argue these could be anything from fog to double exposures. What makes La Llorona particularly chilling in our modern context is how her story has evolved. While maintaining its core elements, the legend has adapted to reflect contemporary fears. Some versions now place her in urban settings, near drainage canals and retention ponds, anywhere water collects in the city. She's no longer confined to rural rivers. She could be anywhere. This adaptation demonstrates the legend's staying power and its ability to remain relevant across generations and changing landscapes. But there's another layer to consider. What if La Llorona isn't just a ghost story? What if she's something else? A manifestation of collective guilt and grief that Mexican and Hispanic communities have created and sustained through centuries of retelling? Psychologists who study folklore know that La Llorona appears most frequently in communities experiencing trauma, displacement, or cultural stress. She's been cited after natural disasters, during wars, and times of social upheaval. Perhaps she's a way for communities to process their own losses, to give form and voice to grief that would otherwise be unbearable. Or perhaps, and this is the possibility that should disturb you most deeply, Perhaps the legend persists because it's based on something real. Not necessarily a woman who drowned her children, but some entity that feeds on our guilt and grief, that draws power from our deepest regrets. An entity that has learned to take the form of La Llorona because that's the shape. We expect it to take the form that allows it to slip past our rational defenses and touch the raw emotional centers of our minds. If that's true, then every time we tell her story, every time we fear her presence, we're feeding her, making her stronger, more able to manifest in our world. So when you hear crying near the water late at night, when you see a figure in white standing by the river's edge, ask yourself, is this just a story meant to frighten children? Or is it something much older and much darker? Something that has learned to wear the mask of legend to hide its true nature? Our final story brings us back to where we started, to Dallas, to White Rock Lake. This beautiful urban reservoir has been a gathering place for decades, a spot where families picnic, where joggers complete their circuits, where couples watch the sunset paint the water gold and crimson. But when darkness falls, White Rock Lake becomes something else. It becomes hunting ground for one of Texas's most persistent ghosts, the Lady of the Lake. The story began circulating in the 1930s, though some accounts push the origin back even further. A young woman, beautiful and blonde, attends a party near the lake. She's wearing a white evening dress, the kind of gown that catches the light and flows like water itself. The party runs late, stretching past midnight. Perhaps she drinks too much. Perhaps she simply loses her footing on the dark shore. The exact circumstances change depending on who's telling the story, but the result is always the same. She falls into the lake and drowns, her white dress billowing around her like angel wings before the water claims her. That should be the end of her story, but it's only the beginning. Late-night drivers on the roads surrounding White Rock Lake begin reporting encounters with a young woman matching her description. She's soaking wet, her white dress clinging to her body, water streaming from her blonde hair. She flags down cars, desperate for help, saying she needs a ride home. Good Samaritans stop. How could they not? She appears distressed, shivering, clearly in need of assistance. They invite her into their vehicle, often giving her a jacket or blanket. She provides an address on Gaston Avenue in the Old East Dallas neighborhood. The drivers head toward her address, making conversation, asking what happened to her. She's vague in her responses, seems disoriented, possibly in shock. They assure her everything will be all right, that they'll get her home safely. Then they glance in the rearview mirror or turn to ask another question, and she's gone. Vanished completely. The only evidence she was ever there is the wet spot on their seat, water still dripping onto the floorboards, and the jacket or blanket they'd given her, soaked through and cold as ice. The most unnerving accounts come from those drivers who did reach the Gaston Avenue address she provided. In the earliest versions of the story, they would knock on the door and a man would answer, his face etched with old grief. Before they could explain about the woman they picked up, he would say, "You saw my daughter, didn't you? She drowned in White Rock Lake years ago, but people still see her. She's trying to come home." He'd show them a photograph, and they'd recognize the woman who'd been sitting in their car just minutes before. This is a classic vanishing hitchhiker story, a type of legend that appears in cultures worldwide. But the White Rock Lake lady has particular characteristics that set her apart. Unlike many ghostly hitchhikers who simply vanish, she leaves physical evidence: the water, the wet clothes. Multiple witnesses over decades have reported identical encounters, describing her appearance, her behavior, even the specific address she provides, without having any prior knowledge of each other or the legend. This consistency across independent accounts lends the story a disturbing credibility. Moreover, the Lady of the Lake continues to be cited. As recently as last year, people posted on local forums about picking up a wet woman near White Rock Lake who vanished from their vehicle. These aren't attention seekers trying to go viral. These are ordinary people, genuinely disturbed by their experiences, seeking explanations for something that shook their understanding of reality. They describe the overwhelming cold that filled their car while she was present, a cold that had nothing to do with their conditioning or weather. They talk about feeling watched for days afterward, about dreams of drowning, about glimpsing a figure in white in their peripheral vision when they're near water. Psychologists might explain this as a folie douce, a shared delusion amplified by exposure to the legend. Once you know the story, once you're driving near the lake late at night, your mind is primed to interpret ambiguous stimuli as evidence of the ghost. A woman walking home after a swim, a shadow cast by trees, the reflection of moonlight on wet pavement. Any of these could trigger the expectation and be perceived as an encounter with the lady of the lake. This explanation is rational, comforting even. It allows us to maintain our grip on the ordinary world. But what if it's not delusion? What if something actually exists at White Rock Lake? Something that feeds on the attention and belief the legend has generated over the decades. Belief is a powerful force. When thousands of people share a story, repeat it, invest emotional energy into it, that creates a kind of psychic resonance. Some theories in parapsychology suggest that this resonance can give form to things that didn't previously exist, can create tulpas or thought forms that take on a semi-independent existence. If that's true, then the Lady of the Lake began as a story, but has become something more. Something that can manifest physically, interact with witnesses, leave evidence of its presence. There's another possibility, darker still. What if the original woman never existed? What if something else has been at White Rock Lake all along? Something that learned it could lure victims more easily by wearing the guise of a drowning victim in need of help. Predators throughout the animal kingdom use mimicry to attract prey. What if something non-human has learned to mimic human distress signals, taking advantage of our empathy and our compulsion to help those in need? That would explain why the sightings have continued for so long, why they follow such a consistent pattern. It's not one ghost. It's something that's learned what form works best to draw humans close. Consider the implications of that. Every act of kindness, every impulse to help someone who appears to be in distress. These good instincts that we pride ourselves on could potentially make us vulnerable to something that sees us as prey. That's a particularly insidious form of horror because it attacks the very qualities that make us human, that make us decent. It suggests that the world punishes compassion, that stopping to help can lead to encounters with forces that shouldn't exist. So you're driving home late one night, you're tired, thinking about tomorrow's obligations, barely paying attention to the road. Then you see her in your headlights, that woman in white, soaking wet, her arm raised to flag you down. Her face is desperate, pleading. She needs help. What do? Every instinct of human decency tells you to stop, to offer assistance. But knowing what you know now, knowing the stories, would you trust that instinct? Or would you drive past, unable to shake the feeling that you've just abandoned someone who truly needed help? And if you do stop, if you open that door, what exactly are you inviting into your vehicle? Is it a lost soul trying to find her way home? Or is it something far worse? Something that has waited decades for you to make exactly that mistake? These 5 stories, these 5 fragments of Texas darkness share common threads. They speak to our deepest fears, the fear of the unknown, the fear of betrayal, the fear of forces beyond our control or comprehension, the fear of irreversible mistakes, the fear that our compassion can be weaponized against us. They remind us that despite our technology, our science, our carefully constructed rational worldview, there are cracks in reality where something else peers through. These aren't just entertaining tales to be shared around campfires. They're warnings, encoded in narrative form, passed down through generations because on some level, consciously or not, we recognize their truth. Texas is a vast place, full of open spaces where darkness accumulates, like floodwater. In those spaces, in those long stretches between towns where the highway cuts through nothing but emptiness, strange things happen. Things that get reported to skeptical authorities who file them away and forget them. Things that witnesses spend the rest of their lives trying to rationalize, trying to fit into a worldview that doesn't accommodate such experiences. But the stories persist because the experiences persist. Because whatever these phenomena are, whatever truth lies beneath the legends, they haven't gone away. They're still out there, waiting in the darkness of Lake Worth, walking the halls of old hospitals, dancing above the Marfa Desert, weeping by riverbanks, and standing wet and shivering on the shores of White Rock Lake. The real question, the one that should follow you into your dreams tonight, is this: what else is out there? What other horrors have we filed away as mere stories because accepting their reality would shatter our comfortable assumptions about how the world works? How many legends began as truth before we decided it was safer to believe they were fiction? And when you encounter something you can't explain, something that violates every rule you thought governed reality, will you have the courage to acknowledge it? Or will you do what most people do? Rationalize it, forget it, convince yourself it didn't really happen, and in doing so, leave yourself vulnerable the next time it comes for you. Because make no mistake, if these things exist, if there's even a grain of truth to these tales, then they're still out there, still watching, still waiting, still hungry. Sleep well tonight. And if you hear something scratching at your window, if you hear crying in the distance, if you see lights where no lights should be, maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just the wind, just your imagination, just a rational phenomenon you don't yet understand. Or maybe, just maybe, it's something that's been waiting for you to notice it. Something that's been there all along, hiding in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. Something that is finally ready to show you that the line between legend and reality was never as clear as you hoped it was.